Hi, and welcome to the Take the Stage podcast. I'm your host, Alexis Alvarez, and I'm on a mission to help make diversity more of a reality for lower middle market and middle market investment firms. Take the Stage celebrates and amplifies diverse voices and serves as a platform for conversations that encompass a wide range of perspectives. You're going to hear candid conversations that touch on career paths, the not so linear kind, valuable insights, practical advice, and honest stories on navigating and succeeding on the buy side. Today on Take the Stage, we're going to talk to Jessie Harris, VP of Investments at TXV Partners, an Austin-based venture capital firm focused on the intersection of health, tech, and sports. We're going to talk about Jessie's journey from a public policy degree to investment banking and early-stage VC investing, the importance of being open-minded and exploring various industries to discover your passion, why raising your hand and taking on opportunities outside your comfort zone is essential, the rise of women's sports and the challenges of reaching parity with men's sports, VC's crucial role in improving accessibility and wellness through innovative investments, and much more. Okay, Jessie, thank you for being my guest today. So I'm going to let you take the stage. Start by telling us a little bit about yourself.
Thanks, Alexis. Appreciate you having me here. So my backstory, I was born and raised in Southern California, grew up an athlete, really wanted to pursue athletics in college. So eventually found myself going to the East Coast to play volleyball at Princeton. And while I was at Princeton, explored a lot of different things. It was a very liberal arts focused school. So didn't take a whole lot of classes that were super applicable to the real world, but ultimately found myself majoring in public policy with a minor in trade and finance. But ultimately really wanted to get into business. And that's a very broad term, obviously. Didn't really know much about the finance world. Everyone seemingly in the Ivy League ends up at Wall Street at some point in their life. And so I went down the investment banking route and interned there for a summer and then ended up coming back full time. And so that's kind of where I started my career, very traditional finance path. But really the reason why I went to do that was to try to build a foundation that I felt would be applicable across a bunch of different industries kind of down the line when I really did figure out what exactly it was I wanted to do.
Perfect. So talk to me a little bit about kind of that transition, from investment banking, because you've explained something like very, very straightforward and very linear. And we all know that it is very rare that our career paths are very straightforward and linear. So kind of take me into more of, how you went from, investment banking to where you are right now and kind of, the little stops along the way that maybe kind of help to push you to where you are.
Yeah, no, for sure. So, as I started my career in investment banking, and now I'm kind of finding myself still in an investor seat, kind of on the other side of the table. I'm a vice president at TXV Partners, multi-stage fund based in Austin, really focused on kind of the intersection of health, tech, and sports. Within the last couple of years since I started my career in banking, I have transitioned both to the buy side to a different asset class within credit. I've kind of done a lot of the roles that typical investors get to participate in. And so, when I was in banking, one of the biggest things that I really focused on was being in a position where I could be industry agnostic and really understand what the different verticals and industries were out there and kind of what really excited me about them and which ones I was really passionate about. And so ultimately was on the private placements desk at Barclays, basically doing debt private placements and equity private placements for large private corporate clients. So we worked on, everything from raising bonds for large kind of antiquated power and utilities companies all the way to doing SPAC transactions for innovative new ideas. And so I saw a lot and really enjoyed my time there, really good learning experience, but ultimately ended up working on a deal for Blackstone Credit at the time. They were raising a large new credit fund, and we helped them raise the debt for that. And so once I was working with that team, got to know them pretty well, ended up actually getting reached out to by them and recruited to take a position within their growing credit arm. There were a couple different positions they were kind of hiring for at the time. And so I interviewed for several of them, and really was trying to figure out, what skills that I had learned in banking were going to be one, the most applicable to each of the individual roles, but also really, centering around my own strengths, which at the time were very much, client relationships, very outward facing, pitching, marketing, etc. And so when I joined Blackstone Credit, I was on their direct lending business development company called BCred, working a lot kind of across a couple of different parts of the business. One was obviously fundraising and kind of client relations. Another was kind of the marketing and strategy behind those funds. So working with the senior level investment team to really position the funds in a way that was appealing to the market. Worked on a lot of diligence processes. And so got a kind of feel across the board, all the way from like IR and BD to more strategy and portfolio ops. And really enjoyed kind of being able to wear a bunch of different hats. Ultimately, that's not necessarily where my personal passions lied. I think if you look at, my progression prior to starting my career as an athlete and kind of going from Southern California to the East Coast, I had always been really interested in health, wellness, sports, all these kind of buzzy words that we hear today. And I think, that was always something I wanted to be doing, whether that be on the operating side or the investing side. And so when I was at Blackstone, I kind of looked at that step as building more foundation, building a bigger network, and really understanding different asset classes that will ultimately help me if I ever want to be an operator, or getting into a different investor seat to really understand the broader market. And so now where I'm today, very, very different seat. Obviously, super early stage investing on the venture capital side. We're looking at much smaller companies in much more innovative and newer markets. And so really, made that transition from Blackstone into a role that I could see myself in for the length of my career. I had explored a couple different avenues on the operating side for businesses that I was very passionate about, but ultimately settled on TXV because one, I just really loved the team. Super young, super innovative, really great vision for the company and kind of what we should be investing in when it comes to health. And then two, the opportunity to work with a small team, which I had never really done before. Being on a team of 6, I also get to wear a lot of hats, but in a very different world than private credit. So my role today really is, vice president on paper, but ultimately what that means is working across a couple different areas of the business, from fundraising to deal sourcing and diligence, all the way to kind of operations, marketing, content, everything in between. So, we're a small fund, we're growing a lot, but really investing in this kind of intersection of things that I've always been really passionate about in my life. And trying to take my learnings from working at some larger institutions and kind of integrate that into the smaller institution that we have today, to help that grow and, become kind of a generational business.
I love it. So there's a lot of things that you've said in this. One, you've had a whirlwind career and you're under 30, is the first thing that like pops to my mind, because you've gone from 2 very large institutions into a very lean, small team that's, probably closer to a startup than, in terms of how it operates. And you're in a VP level role. So obviously you've known how to kind of move, you've known how to build relation, or that's like at least what I think when I hear this story. And so to me, it's really fascinating for someone like me who interviews people for a living and understanding career trajectories. And so just to see, all the stops that you've made along the way and kind of where you are right now. So the first question that pops to my mind is, when you were, when you were in college, were you familiar with VC? Was it something that you had exposure to before? Or was it just something that you really kind of came across or kind of really came to understand once you were, once you began your career?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Before kind of getting into finance, actually in college, I was very into politics. I was a public policy major. A lot of people that came out of the Woodrow Wilson School at Princeton became politicians. And so my actual first internship had always been with, I interned for a mayor in high school, and then I interned for a congresswoman after my sophomore year. And so was very unaware of kind of what was out there. Once I got into banking, obviously the world kind of opens up a little bit. You hear about private equity, you hear about private credit, you start to learn about different asset classes, one of which being venture. And obviously being from California, Northern California, Silicon Valley was kind of the hub of venture. And so, we'd all heard of, the Silicon Valley show, and there's jokes made about it all the time. And, big, large IPOs for companies that were venture backed have always been in the news. And so I had a very high level understanding of what venture was and had, heard the buzzwords, but really didn't grow interested in the space until I really started to explore actually operating. And so, while I was at Blackstone, even while I was at Barclays, I always kind of had this desire to go work on the corporate side and be at a business focused on a singular goal, and kind of working towards growing that individual business versus when you're working in banking or on the buy side, you're really kind of spread across a bunch of different assets or businesses themselves. And so I was exploring actually the operating side of things. And, my first question to myself was, if I'm going to go dedicate all my time to just one business, what are the industries that I'm really passionate about and I can see myself wanting to stick with for a long, long time? And ultimately, I kind of came across, this idea of the integration between tech and health, and all the way from kind of this like consumer health lens through to more clinical applications of health and technology. And so knew I wanted to be in that kind of broad sector. And for me, I felt like I hadn't narrowed it down enough to maybe actually take that jump to operation. So that's when VC really came in the picture. I saw VC as a really great opportunity to talk to hundreds, if not thousands, of entrepreneurs a year about companies that they were building in this broad space that I was interested in. And being able to talk to them and really see on a day-to-day basis what the different verticals were that were being built out within the industry, and what companies were succeeding and ones that weren't, I felt that it could give me a better grasp on what I wanted to do on the operating side. Ultimately, I think, as my time in VC has come up on about a year now, I really, really do like being in the investor scene. And I think it's something that I see myself doing long term. Who knows if I'll go back to operate, but that was really my thinking behind it. And I think that VC is a unique role in which, you're seeing the ideation of companies and industries at the earliest stages, even pre-product. And so it kind of inspires a lot of entrepreneurs. I think you see a lot of VCs actually come out of the investing role and work on the operation side or found companies. So that was kind of the impetus for it, but ultimately ended up really liking the investor role. And yeah, that's kind of how I thought about the process. And, really wasn't until 2 or so years ago that I was really exposed to VC. But as I started talking to more folks in the space, and, networking kind of in the broader ecosystem, it really was an attractive opportunity for me, both in terms of the industry itself and all the opportunities they have, but in terms of where my skill set really fit in with kind of investing and being in an operating role.
Mm-hmm. You said something really, really interesting that I kind of take note of here. And you said that, and the reason why it's interesting to me is because I speak to so many early career professionals, right? And not even, I talk to a lot of older, seasoned professionals, right? And this would be, really good for them as well when they're kind of looking at next steps in their career. And you said, that when you were exploring kind of the operating side of things, the first question to yourself was, if I'm going to spend all my time to one business or on one business, dedicating my time to one business, what are those industries that I'm really passionate about? And I think that's a really good question that, especially at the early career level, we don't ask ourselves, or most, most junior folks won't ask themselves, and probably, a lot of senior folks won't either. And so I think that's just, like a really good one. It's a really good anchoring question, right? Because that's obviously what has kind of allowed you to forge your path, right? It's just something that really stood out to me, and so I want anyone that listens that's kind of entertaining. Entertaining the idea of do I want to go VC? Do I want to go into an operating role? What do I want to do within this space? That's an excellent question to really to explore, right? To really start to kind of maybe have more conversations around that.
Yeah.
So, like another thing that I wanted to touch on, because you've been in, you've gone from a LevFin role, you've gone to Blackstone, and now you're working in early stage investing. Obviously, all of them are completely, they're completely different, adjacent in many ways, right? But still very different. So, in terms of, when you look at the differences from role to role and the responsibilities and skill sets and cultures between these different types of companies and what you think you need to succeed, talk to me a little bit about kind of what you think those things are that someone needs to have in order to really kind of maybe make a mark for themselves.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think early in my career, when I was going into banking, candidly, I was doing it because everyone else was doing it, and I was very unsure about what I wanted to do. And it seemed like a great place to start, a good salary in a good city,
Truth comes out.
a way to build network. And candidly, I ended up having a much better experience than I think most people give to banking. But I think, the biggest things that I've learned transitioning through all these different roles, I've worked across multiple different asset classes in very different seats, whether it be an investor role or an IR type role or a strategy role or even, an advisory role. I've done a lot of things. And I think at the end of the day, the biggest help that I've found has been being very, very open-minded in terms of like the day-to-day. I think that sometimes, especially when we're young and we're in school with a bunch of very accomplished people that are trying to, they know exactly what they want to be. They're like, I want to be a lawyer. I want to be a lawyer forever. I want to be a doctor. Wanted to be a doctor forever. And I think when you aren't sure, sometimes you try to narrow it down maybe too quickly. And so I think, going into banking, the biggest help for me was just keeping my mind really open about what it is that my career was going to look like. I knew I wanted to be successful. I knew I wanted to work hard. I wanted to be, a boss and just do all those great things, but I didn't necessarily know what that looked like. And it was okay. And kind of taking a step back, and each job you go into, finding the pieces that you were really, really good at and how well you fit into those little areas, and finding your niches is really important. And I don't think you can do that if you have a preconceived notion about like what you should be doing or what you should be good at. And so in banking, for example, the team that I was on was relatively small. And so I always raised my hand to do like client pitches and be in front of the Zoom camera at the time. And that, I think, gave way to the relationship that I had built with the people at Blackstone, and was the reason why they, came out to me to extend an offer and kind of join their team. And so if I had not raised my hand, if I had settled into the typical analyst role, which was sit behind your Excel screen and kind of do all the dirty work, then I would have not had that opportunity. But I knew that my skills were speaking to people, relating to people, pitching. And so I took that opportunity when it was given to me. And then when I went to Blackstone, I was sitting in a different role. It was a much more outward facing role. And I think, I tried to build network across the firm with individuals that I saw myself potentially being in the future. There was a couple folks that were not necessarily in my direct group, but worked with a lot, and I had asked to sit in on meetings with them, and I would ask, to have coffee with them every once in a while and really ask them about their day to day, their career trajectory. And I think, finding those opportunities and finding the people that are similar to you that you'd want to be like when you're older is really helpful in helping you narrow it down what it is that your career is going to look like. And so after Blackstone, I had known the two co-founders of TXV for a number of years. They were both Princeton alums. I had, been connected with them multiple times and followed their journey kind of to building the firm. And so when I decided, to take that step in my next career, I wanted to be able to look to both of them and say, hey, in 5-10 years, are these people where I would want to be? And that answer was yes. And then looking at the skill set of them and kind of what their biggest and best traits were, I felt like I also projected those and had those. And so I think, it's okay to not know, and you just got to tell yourself that and be a sponge and kind of absorb the people around you, the things that are going on, and where it is you're adding a lot of value. And if it's similar to those above you, then that's probably a good role for you. If it's not, then go find those people that are similar to you, maybe a couple years, a couple steps ahead. Because one, you can really learn from them, but also two, it's most likely going to be a position that you can also succeed in.
That's really solid advice. I like that. I think there's always a really common thread when I look at, high achievers, people that have been able to move throughout their career and kind of always land in jobs that they, that they really enjoy, that they want, it's a very common trait. And and I've heard it many times, like, you need to raise your hand. But I want to talk about the part about, we all say we've heard it before, like, you need to raise your hand, you need to put yourself out there, right? Now, it sounds really easy, but it's also, I think, for most people, very intimidating. How did you kind of get past maybe that? Did you feel intimidated? Was it ever like, oh my gosh, like, like maybe you wanted to hold yourself back? Because no one talks about that. Everyone says, go out and do that. But how do you get past what's in your own head first? Or maybe your experience was a little bit different.
Yeah, I mean, I think it starts even earlier than your career. I think, being an athlete my whole life, I was forced to be in like those uncomfortable positions quite a bit. And that probably contributed to my willingness to kind of raise my hand early on. I also think, it has a lot to do with like the way your parents raised you. And I remember my, first day of high school, my mom saying, make sure you always sit in the front and things like that. And so I think that also all builds up to being this type of person. But ultimately, I think, especially early on in your career, it's probably a little bit easier in institutions like a Barclays where there's, 80 entry level people kind of coming in with you. So you're all kind of just lost together and trying to figure out your way. But I think in any situation, what I've noticed and the times that I haven't raised my hand, I have seen, I've been given less feedback, and I haven't really grown from those situations. Like maybe I was just sitting back and listening to someone else speak and whatever. But the times that I have spoken up versus not spoken up, I've just learned so much more and taken so many steps further, regardless of whether or not that, thing that I did or the thing that I talked about or raised my voice with wasn't necessarily like super correct technically. I've always gained more respect, gained more feedback from the times that I have. I think that, it's difficult when you're super, super early in your career and you don't want to misstep or make mistakes or look stupid or whatever it may be. But I think you have to realize like you need to give yourself grace, and the amount of grace that like your bosses will give you, especially knowing like you're a first year out of college or second year out of college, they're more impressed with your ability to be confident and brave enough to talk and speak up versus whether or not what you're actually saying is like super substantial or even right often. So I think that you'll find you'll get much more brownie points by doing that and being the outgoing one. Obviously, later in your career, you got to focus on the substance of it and the accuracy of it. But I think early on, it's just about shots on goal. And if you can kind of click into that mindset early on, I think it'll open up a lot more opportunities, and your voice will be heard later on, and you'll really kick down some doors that seemingly were closed beforehand.
I like that, shots on goal. Because that is 100%. What's the Gretzky quote? Like, you miss 100%.
You miss 100% shots you don't take.
But it's so accurate. It's like, I love sports analogies, and I know you'll appreciate them too. But it's like it's so accurate, right? If it is about shots on goal, it's about kind of just putting yourself out there. I always tell my kids, like, you need. And I tell myself this too, not just them, but I'm like, you need to constantly be uncomfortable. No one likes to be uncomfortable,
Yeah.
But you have to be, especially early on. Well, actually not even especially early on. I think especially early on teaches you the importance of it. And then the thing is, like, if you don't want to be stagnant and kind of be stale later on in your career, you have to still consistently put yourself out there and be uncomfortable in order to really have stretch, right? Because that's what your career is about, right? It's about that stretch. And no one really talks about that part, right? We talk about like all the really great things, but not necessarily, like once it's like done and over, but no one really, focuses on the little pain points and the doubt and all these little things that the monkey brain, as I call it, that pulls you in in the opposite direction. So speaking of, actually, I want to go to the next point. Speaking about, kind of the tough parts of the journey. You're a female investor, so you have kind of two things working against you here in terms of you're a woman working in a traditionally male-dominated field. I don't know if we mentioned that, the firm has a focus on wellness, and within that, sports, right? So you're obviously very interested in the sports piece of it. And so I kind of want to know, what has been the most significant challenge that you have experienced in your career as a woman in this space and within the sectors that you might invest in?
Yeah, I'll tackle, kind of the broader being a female in finance first, because I think there's a lot of nuances to that. I think the biggest thing that I have encountered, and I know, speaking to my peers that are also in similar positions, there is this kind of unsaid thought around offices that are very male dominated, and that when a female is hired, or there's like one female in a team, it's the token female. It is like an impact play. Like, they're not there because they were better than all the other candidates. They're there because they were the best woman. And I think that mindset is really, really harmful, especially to females super early in their career, because they already are starting out like they feel lesser than those around them. And I think that, the competitiveness in me has always taken that and used it as fuel. And I am grateful for that, because, the first team I was ever on when I was a banking intern, like, it was me and 15 guys covering leveraged finance, oil and gas, like the most male dominated industry you could be in. And for me, I took that as a challenge. For others, it can be really detrimental, and it could kind of force you to want to be in different industries, or maybe transition into a role that has more females, because you just don't see people around you like that. I think the other big hurdle that a lot of people don't talk about, and I think it's much more prevalent in the kind of more old school finance, so like banking and private equity, versus VC is a little bit more progressive, I think, in this way. But I have had a really hard time in my career finding other females that are senior that want you to do well and are really supportive. I think, there's obviously only a handful of them. So finding a mentor in the space is even hard in and of itself, but finding one that really wants to invest time in you and is rooting for you and doesn't see you as kind of competition, I think is really difficult. There are obviously exceptions to this rule. I think that there's a lot of amazing women that have done so much for women in finance. But a lot of times I've encountered kind of this like clash between, hey, I had to go through this difficulty. Like when I was, coming up through finance, like there was all the odds were stacked against me. I had to fight the patriarchy, whatever you want to say. And so because of that, they kind of have this, you need to do it too mindset of like, if you want to get here, you got to go through the trenches as well. So oftentimes it leads to, less supportive senior level mentorship from women. But, like I said, there are exceptions to every rule, but that is also something that I've definitely encountered, which is also why, as I grow my career, I really want to make sure that I'm like a vocal advocate for females mentoring females, because like that's the only way that we, create this community that can actually excel women to senior level positions and make it a more inclusive environment. In terms of the sports angle, I think it's interesting because especially currently, there's a huge focus on women's sports. I mean, with the NCAA basketball and Caitlin Clark and the NIL contracts that some of these female athletes are getting, there's definitely a heightened discussion around it. And, there's a couple different firms that are targeting specifically women's sports investing. I think there's a lot more funding and attention on women's health investing. And so it seems like it's a hot topic right now after, years of kind of being tossed aside. So I think the landscape is changing. But, where we currently are playing in terms of sports team and sports investing is really kind of in those larger, older models, top 5 North American major leagues, tier 1 soccer, et cetera, which are very male dominated. There's almost zero female owners of teams, and most of them are part owners or daughters of owners or whatever it may be. From a management standpoint, there's like literally no GMs or presidents or CEOs of any of these major sports teams that are female. I think obviously all of those teams are also male sports teams. So it's just, it's few and far between that you find a female in a position of power within those ecosystems. And then on the investing side, obviously, these are difficult rooms to get into. Private equity ownership of sports has historically been kind of veiled in mystery for a while, and only recently has it really taken hold. Before then, it was high net worths and syndicates of very, very rich people investing in sports. And so now that it has been institutionalized, those rooms are starting to open up, but they're still pretty closed doored and pretty white male dominated, which is, that's how the industry was started, and that's how it's succeeded for a very long time. So I think that it will slowly start to open, but I will say I've gotten a lot of interesting looks when I, walk into some of those rooms or when I'm having some of these conversations, because of my gender and I was an athlete, so I feel like I have a little bit more relatability to the sports world, so I can always kind of harp on that. But it's just an industry where I think that there was a very set way to do things, a very set group of people that were involved in those things. And it's much slower to change because there's just not really as much innovation. It's not like venture capital where you're coming up with a completely new technology and a completely new company. It's like football's been played essentially the same way for the last 100 years, and trying to kind of disrupt the norm is really hard. And I think that it will take time, but we're seeing a lot of progress in the space. And there's a private equity firm called Monarch Collective, and they're investing solely in women's sports. And I think initiatives like that are really pushing the ball forward for women to have a say. And I think the increased media attention around female professional athletes also helps give that kind of legitimacy and respect that they need from both an investor lens and kind of operator or player lens to really allow women a say in this kind of conversation around sports and sports tech and ownership in teams.
Do you think that women's sports will ever get to the point where they'll be on par with men's sports from, well, let's start with that, and then we can kind of like break it down.
Yeah, this is a tough question. I think, the athlete in me, and the competitor in me would love to say yes. Realistically, I don't think so. And that's not to say that they won't become extremely popular and these athletes won't be paid salaries that are on par or at least better than they are being paid now. I think the biggest issue here is a couple of things. I think that, you know, biologically, women can't jump as high, run as fast, hit as hard as males. And our society has been kind of conditioned to like violence and, you know, exceptionalism. And so when you're comparing like, Caitlin Clark to LeBron James, it's an unfair comparison. But most people would prefer to watch LeBron James do all those crazy things because it's technically more exceptional. And so I think that, the audience and viewership for women's sports is growing exponentially. I think that they will get to a point where they're getting great media contracts that really can provide stable income for these players, and elevate them to a level that professional athletes should be on. But ultimately, I don't know if there is a world in which female sports can be on par or take over male sports from a pure kind of value perspective, just because of, most of these valuations are driven by media revenue and merchandising. And I think within male sports, it's the spectacle of it that really gets people going. And like within the NFL, it's a perfect example, like people love watching grown men hit each other as hard as possible. There's never going to be a world in which we have a football league where women are doing that. And even if there is, they're not hitting each other as hard. They physically can't. And so I think that the way that we've been trained to enjoy entertainment and sports is really geared towards enjoying male sports more. I will say that there are several sports that actually cater better, I think, to female players because, volleyball is a perfect example. Most folks actually really enjoy watching women's volleyball more than men's because the way that sports played, the way the rules work, women can actually have more rallies. The points can go longer because they're not hitting the ball as hard. So it's easier to play it. The net is a little bit lower. They're not, there's a lot of things that are involved in women's volleyball that allow it to be drawn out a little bit longer and make it a little bit more interesting. I think there are other sports in which this is the case. And I mean, like men's and women's tennis, for example, like the differentiation between those two is not huge. Men's tennis is definitely still a bit more popular, but like when you get, Serena Williams of the world or these massive celebrities, it's actually pretty easy to compare them and have them be on the same playing field. So I think there are opportunities for women's sports to, maybe get a little bit of an upside, probably not in the major sports. But I think there are opportunities there. I just don't necessarily know if like when we're talking about the major North American leagues that women's sports will ever kind of get to that level. Obviously I could be totally wrong and hopefully I am, but I think that's kind of how I think about it right now. And I think how most folks are viewing the broader sports landscape and how women's sports, plays into that.
Mm-hmm. No, that was an awesome summary. You all right now you said something really interesting. So you referred to Serena as a celebrity right now, which I thought was an interesting, right? Not because that's kind of what the world we live in now. Like before, athletes were athletes, right? And they were just athletes, right? But now the model is changed. Do you see that? Like, do you see that happening now a little? I mean, we see it with a couple people, not nearly in, like in proportion to the number of men that are athletes and that have that celebrity kind of presence. I mean, the number of women is fewer. Do you see that now? Do you think that there's a growing trend where we're going to have more female athletes that are going to be in the limelight, that are now going to be, the equivalent of a Tom Brady, or, name any other, big league, male athlete celebrity?
Yeah. I mean, candidly, I think that is the key to elevating women's sports. I mean, you're seeing it with the NIL. Without Caitlin Clark, the NCAA basketball tournament wouldn't have done what it did on the women's side. I think that women have a very unique advantage from both like a physical perspective. Unfortunately, you know, like if you're a cute girl, it's a lot easier to market. And I think that you're seeing that in the NIL space, and, you know, more power to you, like use what you have. But I also think that there is this, you know, innate, I think females have a better sense of how to really position themselves as more than just like one individual thing. Like women are better multitaskers. Women, you know, are probably better marketers. Women understand the power of branding. Women are the biggest consumers. They understand what the consumer needs. And so thinking about all these things that women have the advantage of in business and life, etc., I think that you will start to see more female athletes really capitalize on that, because they understand that, you know, in the traditional setting that they're in from a professional athlete perspective, like their salaries are never going to compete with the other male counterparts. So they need to, you know, subsidize the rest of that with brand partnerships, you know, different business avenues, like becoming angel investors, et cetera, et cetera. And they see the best way to do that and get access to those things is by being, one, a very marketable human, but also two, being like broadly appealing. And I think that, you know, people like Serena has her own venture arm. She's an angel investor in a bunch of stuff. She's an investor in sports teams. She's the, you know, face of a ton of different brands. And she's really capitalized on her ability to like understand what the consumer wants, understand where she plays into that. And I think you'll start to see a lot more female athletes do that in order to make the same kind of money that men can with just a salary for them playing. And I think that that's where you'll see a lot of the monetization on the women's sports side, is these like kind of superstar individuals that are extremely charismatic, you know, extremely accessible to the consumer or the fan. And I think there's a lot of opportunity there. I think that, you know, unfortunately, I don't think that the payroll for a women's NWSL team is ever going to be the same as an MLS team. And, you know, those are probably the closest to leagues that we have in the US in terms of, you know, comparability for men and female. But I do think there are a handful of NWSL players out there, like the Alex Morgans of the world, that have just been able to build empires because they understand kind of how candidly to sell themselves. And in order to do so, you know, you have to kind of be dynamic and wear a bunch of different hats and really lean into the things that people know you for or love you for, while also kind of, you know, going against the grain and doing some interesting things that people might not expect from you.
I mean, in essence, you just summarize what it takes to work, to be a woman and work anywhere. Really, in a nutshell.
100%.
Whether you're a celebrity or an athlete or you're an analyst at an investment bank, everything you just said is applicable like across the board. Well, just to start to kind of, you know, wind down, what do you think is, you know, what's VC's role in this particular space?
Yeah, you know, I think early on in my fund's life, we were very focused on consumer health and kind of this, you know, wave of wearables and democratization of data, diagnostic testing, you know, giving people access to things that could help them optimize their health and performance that like historically had only really been available to elite athletes. And so I think, you know, VC's role in so many different industries is really this key of accessibility. You know, there are so many things out there that are really beneficial to industries, to individuals, but the price points are way too high. They end up only being available to the 1%ers or the people that have special access, like a professional athlete. And oftentimes those amazing technologies or products or services don't actually move the ball for society because they're only being applied in such a small portion of the population. I think VC has a really unique chance to bring stuff like this to the masses and really help just your average consumer feel as though they're being treated like a professional athlete or, a tech CEO, and in that produce better health outcomes because now they have the technology to, train like the elite athlete that they wish they were, or, prevent these diseases that, otherwise probably would have crept up on them in old age. And so I think that we sit in a very interesting seat where we're kind of the key unlock to being able to give people access to resources that otherwise are reserved for a very select few. And how that relates to sports, I think it's kind of this push and pull of, do the average consumer actually need a lot of the things that professional athletes use? Probably not, but there are certain things that they get access to that, would benefit everybody. And I think nowadays with media, social media, television, etc., people look to professional athletes as kind of the epitomes of health, of lifestyle, etc. And I think that, using them as kind of the face of some of these products, giving people access to some of these things will really unlock a really good trend in kind of moving our society towards like a healthier, more active community of folks. And I think that VC has the power to really do that through the ability to kind of scale these businesses past just that select few.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, 100%. I think you've said a lot of things like I don't want to go back because then we'll just end up like circling back. But you've said so many like really great points here, and I like that. This is like the power of VC, and the unique position that it has to really produce and improve the lives of consumers. So I think that that's a really interesting. I don't think a lot of people maybe think about it in that way, right? I going back to one of my other podcasts, my episode 17 with Peter Washington. He's a managing director at a credit firm in Chicago, and he used the phrase the power of underwriting, right? I mean that's and when he said it, I just thought that's like such an interesting way to frame it, right? We don't think about, or like I don't even know if people in that space, in the credit space, or who are underwriters or doing any of these deals, maybe even think about it like that. But I mean, that's what he said, and I thought it was just really powerful, the way that he said it, and same thing with kind of what you've just explained right now in terms of kind of BC's unique chance to kind of to really affect change and the power that exists, being able to invest and support in companies that are ultimately have the potential to improve the livelihood and the wellness and the overall being of consumers. So I thought that was a really great way of how you framed it. All right, so as a wrap up here, Jessie, what advice do you have for all those aspiring investors coming after you, especially women?
I think, I'll leave it with two pieces of advice. I think the first one is, no matter how young you are and no matter where you are, understanding the power of network and community is essential to your career. I think that, early on when I was in banking, I was like, oh, I made it to banking. I did my like 2 networking calls to get this job, but I'm good now. Like I don't need to go meet the managing director on the other floor at a different group. I don't need to get coffee with XYZ. Like I have my group. I'm going to sit down, do my work. And ultimately, I grew out of that mindset, and that's kind of how I got my second job. But there are so many opportunities to build network, not when you're just looking for looking for a job or needing a favor, but just in general, building relationships is like the best capital you can ever have. And I think that knowing that as early as possible will lead to so many more doors being open for you. And not being afraid to, make those connections. You're not, you're not sitting there and asking them for favor after favor after favor. You're just getting to know them, building that relationship so that when it is time for you to need to ask for that favor, it doesn't even feel like a favor for them. So I think power of network is something you need to like learn early and do it often, because it will add so much more value to your career, to your life, to everything that you do. I think the second one, as it pertains more so to women, I think that, having a mindset that you deserve to be there and that you don't have anything necessarily to prove, but you're going to prove. Like, I don't want people going into these jobs thinking because there is this, kind of stigma around the token woman or whatever, that they have something to prove. Yes, you need to have that competitive spirit, but ultimately, like, walk in with your head held high, like you deserve to be there, like you're good enough to be there, and that confidence will really, I think, silence a lot of that noise that tends to come out, specifically around women in finance. And the most inspirational women I think I've seen in my time in the industry have been those women that they don't take any BS. They are so confident in themselves and their abilities and their right to be there, and it just shows through. And I think people respect them a lot more because of that. You don't have anything to prove. You got there, but work hard, be confident, build the network. I think those are the biggest things and that I could ever tell anybody. And don't be afraid to speak your mind or to reach out to that person that you've been interested in reaching out to. Like, all of these uncomfortable situations, like we talked about before, are opportunities, and you either take them or you don't. But more often than not, if you take them, the outcomes will be pretty great.
Yes, you preach. I mean, we always say, what's the worst that could happen? But we need to not think that way. And it's like, well, what's the best that could happen? Right? Like what happens if, like, instead of thinking like the absolute worst, right? We start to really focus on like, okay, well, what if actually something really great comes out of this conversation or this reaching out or this uncomfortable feeling? You know what I mean? Like, we don't think that way. We're programmed to think the other way. And so it is going back to, and I'm glad you said that mindset, because it goes back to that mindset, and it goes, really back to that place where we ourselves need to be confident in ourselves, right? And understand that, yes, we deserve to be here. We deserve to, and if we're here, it's because people want to hear what we have to say. That's like another thing that I think we don't realize when we're young, or when we are the only, woman, minority, whatever, non-athlete in the room, right? Whatever it may be, right? And so you have to have that confidence, and it's just too bad, it takes a lot of the times it takes a couple of years, right, for women, not just women, anyone, I want to say, to get that confidence in themselves. So you're 100% right. The earlier you discover that, the more power you personally, not power in the sense over other people, the more power you yield over yourself, right? Like that's a thing. That's, I think, a really important piece. And just to mention your power of networking, that really goes in line with my build your tribe, right? What I always say, the importance of it. Because at the end of the day, you're 100% right. When, if relationships are the currency of our careers, right? Then when you think about it in that regard, it makes sense that you really start early and you start to develop those conversations. And going back to your, to clarify, not even clarify, but just to add on that point that you said, that you're not asking people for favors, right? Which is a very common misconception, that networking equates to asking for favors. And it's not. It's about having conversations and developing relationships and building the tribe. And that's how you start. So solid advice, Jessie. Well, thank you so much for taking the stage and sharing your story and your advice. I think this is a really interesting episode, especially given that we were able to talk on this very, I think thought-provoking topic of VC in sports, women in sports, and kind of where the space is going. So I thank you again for sharing, for sharing your thoughts, and you are welcome back anytime.
Thank you. No, this was great. Appreciate it.
And that's a wrap. Thanks for listening to Take the Stage. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with others, post about it on social media, or leave a rating and review. To hear past shows, please go to our website, career-rockstars.com. If you are a company or candidate who would like to work with Career Rockstars, reach out on LinkedIn or send an email to Alexis at career-rockstars.com. Thanks again, and until next time.